So this graph just gives you an idea of how quickly they can go out from Facebook. I mean, there's still not a huge amount of followers on Facebook. If you think about popular people, Stephen Fry, who's actually blocked me on Twitter, and I've got no idea why, because I didn't even follow him. He's got millions of followers. British Museum's got 100,000. And it's gone up quite quickly. So it started the very last year with about 25,000. They're now to nearly 100,000. Is that good? 9-10% growth a month? That's okay, I think. Then you've got Twitter followers as well. Now, this isn't as impressive, I think, because Twitter's quite easy to get followers on if you start talking about things people are interested in. It goes a bit viral, people start talking about what you're up to. So they've got a very small user base compared to big brands or big museums. And there's quite a lot of research going on at the moment. Lorna's doing research on Twitter, and there's a chap in the museum sector called Jim Richardson, who runs Sleepy Design. And he's doing a lot of work promoting his agency by doing all these surveys, which I think is not particularly good. It should be the museum sector doing this work rather than an agency. So, who likes the museum? This might be interesting to some of you. Demographics. So, this is our age group for people who left university about 10 years ago who started to follow Facebook quite regularly. Where do they come from? United Kingdom and Spain. That's quite a high place where people come from. United States, not so much. Considering the population of the United States, they've only got 12,000 people who like them in America. That's pretty small. We get a huge amount of visitors from the States. So you can actually do some targeted marketing by looking at these stats. So you can start sending out adverts in America. You can start promoting yourself on posters. One of the things we started to look at is QR codes on posters and on platforms, and then putting links on them to try and find out if people are looking at the posters there and telling you which platform it's from. So if you're, say, at West Brompton, you put your smartphone up if you've got one. Not everyone's got a smartphone, so it's a bit segregated. And you click on it, and it says you're at West Brompton, and when you look at this page. So at least you've got a bit more information coming in. So they're measuring social media as well. E-commerce is quite important for the museum. Everyone knows that the museums are facing a big funding crisis. We've had a 15% cut over 4 years. It's actually 16% the end-up figures that DCMS gave us. And the increase in tickets is a really good way of us actually getting more income for the museum. And the online e-commerce sector is one way we can grow this. At the moment, we're not making a huge amount of money. I think it's about £1 million a month off e-commerce sales. It can go up quite a lot. And donations as well is one area which we've got to focus on, so gift aid. And referring traffic to these pages has got to be a big target as well. So you can ask me some questions, and I can try and answer them, but I'm not sure if I can, but give it a try.
Have you noticed any trends in the types of posts that people find more interesting? I just ask because our marketing department have the same kind of thing, and they've noticed there were certain types of posts where people suddenly like retweet or reblog and all this sort of thing, and others where it just get ignored.
I think they're engagement posts where people are actually asking questions and someone's replied back,
right.
And it's a fact that actually is interesting. And one of the things that Lena's been trying to do recently is add more things that are relevant. So say for St George's Day, they send out a message that relates to St George's Day. And people do reply now, and Lena's actually suddenly realised that we need to start talking to people. Someone sends back, that's really interesting, and I came to the museum and I saw these objects. They're now replying back rather than ignoring everything. Whereas I think when we first started off doing social media, it was a one-way dialogue. And I think if museums start doing this, the strategy is you have to engage back and forwards. If you don't, then your Twitter followers will leave you. And I think Lorna is doing lots of work on this as well for archaeology. And she'll perhaps say the same thing in her talk about engagement and conversations. And Twitter is a conversation, it's not a one-way street. And there are quite a few Twitter users in here. I mean, Turley in third row back, she uses Twitter quite a lot. And perhaps it's a question to ask the people here what they find more engaging about museums rather than people working them. Because I love where I work, so obviously everybody going out, maybe I agree with, maybe I don't. But there's other things that have been going out on Twitter recently that the public have been saying. So, say for example, yesterday there was a tweet about some of the cuts in the museum. I'm not going to say where, you can find out if you do a search. And they asked people who are up direct to say, don't cut this part of the museum. So people can use it for different things. You can subvert museum messages as well. Is that sort of last question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What else? Yes.
Can I ask 2 questions?
If you can, by all means.
2
Not at
completely
the same time.
unrelated questions, so I can tend to just to follow on. The first question is, I was interested in the fact that your gender breakdown on the Facebook likes,
Shall we go back to that?
60% women, 37%
Yes.
men. Is that a normal thing. Does anyone else, do you know, does anyone know, is that normal for museums to have that many more women than men?
I can't actually answer that at the moment, but there's been a study by Culture 24 with purely universities and museums. Well, I might be able to get the stats for that. That's meant to be published quite soon. And there's a paper for museums on the Web conference as well that Rachel Clements presented, which you can find online at archimuse.com, which I think gives more stats. But I find that quite surprising as well. There's more women than men that are using these websites. Is it indicative of their tastes of culture or not? Or are men not using Facebook as much? I mean, you can find out, break down the stats people using Facebook from other areas. So I could try and find out for you if you want me to.
It just was a very striking kind of figure out.
Yeah, it's almost double.
Unusual to have that. The other thing that is completely is more what you were just talking about this business of engagement. It's this business of who would people be engaging with? Because if it's marketing departments that are running it, then when somebody is engaging with back to Facebook or Twitter, they're engaging to a marketing department who may or may not have the understanding that the person who's joining the conversation wants. And certainly one of the things that I work with in the church, one of the things we struggle with is that getting people who are doing work to put the effort into these things.
I think that's a big thing. You've got to get the institution to buy into the use of social media. And I think that's starting to work now. And one of the things that people are doing is ask your curator. So it had specific curators working on one day on Twitter. So for example, they had Ben Roberts, who says yes to everything he's ever asked to do in the museum. And he did a day answering questions about specific topics. Now, I think looking at Twitter feeds, he was answering stuff that he could answer questions on. So he'd answer the prehistoric questions more easily than he would, say, Collins sector. He wouldn't have a clue about some of the Peruvian stuff. So you would go and ask a curator who would know, but it might take 3 to 4 days to find out. So there's other ways of doing it as well. If you look at some people's Twitter and Facebook pages, they respond and they've got initials after it, so you know that a certain person's responded to you. And it's a way of actually saying we've got, say, 7 people using the social media, and they've got on a web page, say, Chiara's initials. So if CB responds, it's you responding. If it's DP, it's me responding. So you can actually find out who might be engaging with you. But it's a big problem. I think Tom perhaps got this for Wessex archaeology as well. It might just be you doing the engagement, and you go on holiday, the engagement stops. And that's the other thing. Do you dedicate a full-time team to do social media? I actually think return on investment, having a full-time team on social media is a waste of time at the moment. I think you can just spread the load, just have to talk to your colleagues.
Is that sort of, perhaps resistance is too strong a word from the archaeological sector to getting engaged with this? Is that because they're too busy and haven't got enough time? Is it because they're resistant to new technology? Is it because they simply don't know how it works, they're not users themselves?
Is there a resistance to using social media? I think that might come up in the next paper, actually. I think I shouldn't answer that, just in case there's better things to be said.
Yeah. But in terms of getting colleagues within institutions to reply and actually take part in this, is that...
Well, I think now social media is becoming much more integrated into our lives. More people are starting to use it. And I find it a bit annoying that every newspaper thing you read now, or every TV thing says, on Twitter they were saying this. I mean, get over it. It's just another way of disseminating information.
Yeah.
So, it's going to happen. Well, you'll probably start to use it. I think Don's on Facebook quite a bit.
I'm on Facebook. I've yet to explore the murky world of Twitter. Any more questions for Dan? Yes, please.
Well, it's just a small observation, related but from a different area, is I have a guest lecturer who talks in one of my classes about the use of social media and engagement. He works for the University of Bath now, but he was working for a local authority in London. And they changed their policy, and they had full-time staff to respond to questions and tweets. Things that came through Twitter and Facebook page, their blog and other things like that. And actually that was the quickest way to get an answer. If you posted something up on their blog about if dustbins hadn't been collected, they would be collected because everybody else would actually be reading that and be aware of it. And you get a far better response through the social media than through the traditional mechanism of email, because it's transparent, because it's open, and because everybody else can see it. My feeling with something like the museum sector is that once people see that they can post a question and get an answer back, authoritative answer back, almost straight away or reasonably quickly, then it will generate more traffic that way.
We could try an experiment now. Ask the museum questions, you get a response if you want to.
That was their experience in the local authority sector.
I think you do respond a lot quicker to social media, like you just said. So customer care has gone up a bit now. So BT, for instance, do respond very quickly. They're trawling Twitter on purpose to find out if you've got a problem with their service, because they're worried about losing customers. And I'm not sure if the museum sector's doing that yet. But I follow up some complaints about museums. If someone says that things are broken, or they can do stuff, I write back to them and then speak to Lena as well. If it's just a simple thing.
The thing is, it's open there for everybody else to read. If it's an email, then nobody else reads it other than the recipient. If it's up on social media, it's there for everybody else to see, and everybody else can see, engage, and judge the response that they actually get.
One thing I'd like to find out is whether freedom of information requests has gone up at all, or down because of Twitter or social media use. Because we're publishing everything online now, it's much easier to find information, we're not hiding as much. But we do get questions about Parton novels constantly via Twitter, pressure groups as well, sort of saying, give this back. So there are other concerns with using social media. Any other questions, or shall we carry on with?
No? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, so going back to the mobile side of learning, our final speaker in this session before coffee break is Stiano Busuri from here at UCL, who's going to talk about mobile learning, something that interests me as Head of Education at the Council for British Archaeology, at least until the end of this month. Connecting pupils, curriculum and informal learning environments. Stiano.
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much for coming and thanks for inviting me. I'll try and find my presentation. And while I do that, I just want to say that most of the work I've done in museums was done in science museums. So I guess Chiara wanted to make sure that I'm not off topic. And my brief was that you can talk about what I call science-rich environments as long as you bring it back to archaeology. So we're going to see how well I do with that. Okay, so the study I'm going to talk about, the case study I'm going to talk about today is comes from the National Maritime Museum. They have 3 sites, but I'm going to focus on the Maritime Museum itself. And I'm going to present some findings that come from the study, the visitor study, and then make a comment on engagement, that new paradigm we have in the communication of whatever discipline that is, sector. So the museum provides study days for pupils, for secondary school pupils. And this was a pilot project that they wanted to extend the offerings, the study day offerings that they have, and engage students with through the use of mobile technology. Some of the things that they do, especially on this particular study day focusing on slavery, was hands-on handling sessions with objects, access to archives and manuscripts. They did some introductory lectures, basically, or Q&A, quite basic stuff if we're talking about engagement, not even engagement. And then access to the Atlantic World collection. And that's where the mobile technology comes in. So they wanted that part of the study visit to become more engaging and hands-on. And these are the messages they developed specifically for the handheld resource. With programs, as I'm sure you're aware, you just want to extend the offerings of an exhibition. It doesn't necessarily mean that the program will focus on the exhibition itself or the subject matter of the exhibition. So the Atlantic Worlds Gallery covers a whole range of subjects, but this particular program focuses on slavery, and those were the parts of the collection that the museum wanted the pupils to use. So the emphasis was on looking at how slavery treated Africans as commodities. That was the top level message. That the conditions were horrendous, especially during the Middle Passage and on the Caribbean plantation. That there was resistance actually coming from Africans, and also that this contributed to the abolition of slavery. So this was what the museum wanted people to get. And as you see, they worked on specific questions. So the group was divided into 4 subgroups, and each subgroup got a mobile phone per pair of pupils. So 2 pupils would share 1 mobile phone, and they had to answer one of those questions. And those questions pretty much aligned to the communication messages that they had put together. And that was the point of it all. Oops. How many of you are aware of UCL? Okay, so this works on a membership basis. So if, for example, your museum doesn't have resources to develop a mobile application or buy the mobile phones and so on, you can become a member of UCL, and you're given the actual mobile phones, but also membership of the website. So pupils or whoever uses the mobile phones within the museum can take pictures, they can record messages, they can write messages to themselves to use later, and all of that is stored on a website, the UCL website, where you can go back and do some more work later. And that's why the museum felt that this is particularly appropriate for secondary school pupils, because of the follow-up potential of it. So where I came in was to evaluate the use, or assess the use of those mobile phones in the gallery. And the museum was particularly interested in making sure that this mobile phone meets its goals, which was to extend the learning potential of the study visits, and make sure that this is something that people can use, especially that particular target audience, pupils and their teachers. Identify possible problems, so focus on understanding use and of the mobile resource, and any other problems to do with the effectiveness of that use and the learning that came out of that. But I was also interested in the role that mobile technology can play in connecting pupils to learning in different contexts. And that's very significant, because some new findings came out of that. I don't mean to say that this is a longitudinal study, but it does look at short-term and kind of medium-term outcomes as well. Just a few comments on the approach. The theoretical approach was social constructivism, which in very crude terms it means that I was both interested in preconceptions, prior knowledge and interests and all of that, that is usually covered by constructivism, but also how those groups work within a social group, and how learning, how engaged they are within a small group learning environment. And the methodology that followed on from that was qualitative. And there were different aspects that I had to look at. So one aspect was the time, what happens before, during, but also after the visit, in those different contexts that these outcomes take place. When they prepare for the visit in the museum and during the follow-up. and also involve different people, the main stakeholders within this project, teachers, pupils, and museum staff. I'm not going to focus specifically on the methodology, but if you have questions, you can always ask me about that later. And of course, the focus was the actual handheld resource and how it connected everything together. Now, some of the key elements that, if you've done work with mobile technology, they always come up, and of course they came up in this study as well, is the people involved, the content, the technology, but also the different contexts within which learning takes place for that particular project. So, and here's where I'll try to present some key findings from this study, but also some lessons learned in case you're thinking of implementing something similar in your museum or organization. So, one of the most important things that came up, which I'm sure that if you've done an evaluation research, visitor research, it won't come as a surprise, that you have to understand the social context within which these people function on an everyday basis. And understanding the school life in this particular case was key. How teachers prepare their pupils, what kind of expectations pupils have, and how you manage that or not, as the case might be. And also the role that practicalities play, because usually students are prepared for the content that is going to be covered, but not about how you're going to transition from one context to the other. Whether you'll be able to spend money while you're in the museum, are there any bathrooms there that you can use? Will you have lunch there, and so on. These were some of the questions that pupils came up with when I was at the school. So some of the pre-visit work that the teachers did was the focus on the activities, the context, the tools, and the transition. And they were not always very well briefed to do that, especially if we're talking about history students who bring their pupils to that particular museum. That kind of a person with that kind of profile is not the best person to talk about the technology side of it and prepare the students. So there are huge expectations about using PDFs within the museum, and of course a disappointment that the PDF was not there. And also another thing that came up was that when teachers go back to school, when they do follow-up work, they use existing tools that they have. So pupils had access to websites, and teachers didn't actually manage that very well in terms of the authority, where these resources come from and how authoritative they are, their provenance. And as I said before, teachers' familiarity with mobile phones is key in projects like this, so they need very good briefing if they are to prepare the pupils properly. Now, one of the things that came up, and I was really excited about that, and we all know that different contexts have something to do with the learning experiences that they afford, but there's the evidence is not there, mainly because of the way funding works. We never have time to go and do research in different contexts. But one of the things that came up in this study was that some of the key outcomes that the museum wanted to hit were only achieved at the school. So if you narrowly focus the assessment of that a particular project within the museum environment, then you're very likely not to achieve all the outcomes that you want to achieve. So it's about thinking about the time frame of this as well. And of course the fact that they use and mix and match different tools, and the fact that I looked at some of the learnings need some time to take place. Snapshots of learning during the visit are very good for that capturing a snapshot experience of a pupil. In terms of the content, this is what drives these kinds of technologies. It's not the technology. It is exciting. Of course, you want to use exciting things, but within museums, it's the content that drives everything. And that content needs to be useful to the target audience. So, for example, in preparation, pictures were more useful than text, and the museum had prepared a huge amount of text. Nobody within a school environment has the time to read that, and all museums know that, but they still produce all that text. So it's about how you create a brief text that has all the information you need. An important part of the visit, both for teachers and pupils, was the fact that they were going to see authentic objects, and that was a key part of motivation why they visited the museum in the first place, because they have pictures of things, they can have access to websites and other content. The fact that they were going to handle the collection and feel an empathy with those objects. For the follow-up, as I mentioned before briefly, pupils have access to different kinds of websites, and they cut corners. So if they want to find a good picture, they will download any picture they find online. What I find quite interesting was that in many cases there were history teachers who drove those follow-up experiences, and they still didn't, probably because they're not familiar with the technology, they didn't even think about the provenance of those pictures, or whether those are pictures that they wanted their kids to use in relation to that particular historical event that they were focusing on. So the authority of the source didn't even occur to them. With technology, one of the things that the museum wanted to experiment with was, is OCLU the kind of technology they wanted to use? Are there any other alternatives, and why should we use that? So taking more of a strategic approach, as Dawn mentioned before, and they were quite good at that because they had just employed a digital manager who was very much in tune with those approaches. Do you want a custom-made one just for you, which costs a lot more money, or an off-the-shelf one like OCLU? The museum wanted to experiment with OCLU and then decide what the next step might be. Some barriers to usage also came up. So if we're talking about mobile phones are not allowed anywhere in the Maritime Museum. And they were just allowed within that particular gallery for that particular target audience for about an hour while they were there. So you had normal visitors just thinking, well, I was supposed to use the phone, but also pupils not taking pictures that they thought might be inappropriate. So they were not taking pictures of themselves next to objects, which I found really surprising, which is something that people do in museums quite a lot, and that's a way of making the space your own. But also it was compromised by some of the needs of the objects. So huge parts of the gallery were very, very dark and not very appropriate to be used with a mobile phone, even one that had the camera in a flash on. And also, do you want to go with existing fonts? So do a survey among your visitor groups and see what kind of fonts they use and whether you can develop applications for those particular fonts, which seems to be the way things are going these days. With that particular target audience as well, the teenage audience, they're very technology savvy and they want the latest. So it's a matter of, how do you keep up if you take an off-the-shelf application? It's never going to be good enough for them. So can I try to respond to the brief now, so bringing it back to archaeology and engagement, what we're talking about here. it seems to me that if you look at this program, or as well as its evaluation, the content focus of it is the understanding of historical events viewed through contemporary societal values. So it's a particular kind of model of not quite engagement yet. In terms of the audience, the participation of the audience, certainly the flow of information is one way. Of course, there's some space for the pupils to get involved in some kind of interactive inquiry learning through handling objects, use of mobile technology, but the museum pretty much determines what kind of content they're going to get. And interaction with experts, well, yeah, I mean, there is some presence, especially on the website, because they could pose some questions, and experts, when and if they had time, they would respond to that. It wasn't very well used. But again, the aim is to communicate something to them. So a very much top-down approach with some kind of, it's not quite a consistent approach, which is a good thing, I guess. So I would say that if you could public understanding of archaeology, history, science, whatever it is, versus engagement with those subject matters, probably this particular program, and quite a lot of programs out there, as well as exhibits, would fall under the understanding of model. And even, I mean, that's usually part of the language that we use. We talk about engaging with the audience or audiences, but we also talk about whether people get this or communicating something to them, or getting people to buy into our approach, to think about the messages we wish to communicate, we think are important for them to understand. Or language such as, it will come back to me, a classic one that we use. So we're not quite consistent ourselves, let alone institutions that need to make a huge shift, and some museum staff will never be able to make that shift from understanding to engagement. There are very good examples out there, but you know, it's still, we're still not quite sure what this engagement is or might look like in museums and other informal learning environments. So it seems to me that we're talking about dimensions of engagement, and you'll see that because people are not quite consistent, and we all have classes even within ourselves, you have programs that may, in general terms, fall under the understanding paradigm, but you have activities that are closer to engagement. And that's how, I guess, how we explore different areas or the boundaries of areas. So probably, if it's not a continuum, the boundaries are quite fuzzy at the moment. So it seems to me, in order for us to understand what the theoretical background of the work we do is, it's very important to, and map public engagement approaches, it's very important to see how the different publics participate. There's a lot, for example, out there, a lot of science cafes, and there's a lot of question and answering session. Is that an engagement? Well, how the experts participate, and whether those publics are seen very much as an expert, having an expertise from their everyday life, and whether we can create environments where archaeology, history, or science have a place in our everyday life. And also what the subject of the activities, where the content focus is. So just to kind of conclude, it seems to me that it's very important to look at the role of archaeology or any other discipline in our life in order for us to understand what the ethos of those exhibits, programs, websites, or whatever those offerings really are, to look at what kind of public engagement activities are like or might be like in the future. And it's still, as I said, the verdict is still out there, but we're talking about a huge shift, and we're just starting exploring the borders of that shift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theano. That's a very good critique, I think, of the use of mobile technologies in museum education. And there's a lot in there I liked and sparked off various questions which I could dominate a bit, but I don't want to. Does anyone have particular questions from the audience they want to ask? Oh, I'm looking over there. Can you look down? Sorry.
I was just wondering, when the pupils go and they take their photographs on their camera and things like that, what do they do with the pictures later? Is there a sort of classroom activity where they create something?
Yeah, as I said, there's everything goes saved on the website, the Open website, and then they can go back. They have access to that particular their own website, so they can make it public if they want to, but not necessarily. And the follow-up activity is actually determined by the teacher, but all the information is there that they have collected, but also the museum puts up new information for them to explore. There was a lot of museum jargon there, which made the website, it was very much underused, because pupils didn't know what we mean by museum gallery. I didn't know what they meant by museum gallery, just the store of the museum or shop of the museum. So there was a huge gap between what they could have done with the website and what actually happened, and hence access to different websites that pupils were more familiar with. But that was the impression.
Okay, so they didn't actually do anything with those photographs while they were at the museum. It was a follow-up activity later on in the class.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. During the visit, they were responding to the questions they got and collecting materials around those questions with the aim to use them in the classroom.
It strikes me very much that what you had in that example was a modern version of the old-fashioned museum worksheet. That in the old days, before mobile technology, museums would produce written worksheets where students would go around, look at displays, find objects and write things about them. And you simply got an updated version of that into mobile technology. I think
yeah, in some ways, but pupils were very glad. I cannot tell you how glad they were that they didn't have that worksheet.
Yes.
And the fact that there was, they had quite a few functionality problems, those mobiles, especially connecting to the web, but they felt that the novelty of the technology and the excitement actually overshadowed everything else. So they were much more motivated. So in some ways, yes, but in terms of the kind of learning environment it created, no, I wouldn't compare it with
Okay, interesting. Does anyone else have a question from the floor? I don't want to go and make questions. I've got several questions. Okay, can I ask then, it seems to me that you were quite right in saying that there's a lot of understanding, perhaps dominating rather than engagement through this. And it seems to me that comes down to the initial messages about slavery that were being got across. There were very didactic messages, very informational messages, whereas we all know there's a huge debate about slavery, about who benefited from slavery, the role of native African leaders in slavery, the role of the Arabs in the trans-Saharan slave trade, and all sorts of issues about slavery. And yet the messages seem to be a very traditional, this is how it was, this is how awful it was, and it was all about conveying information, not about debate. Now I'm just wondering who created the initial messages. Was it the museum, was it the teachers, was it a partnership of the two?
I think that it's the education department that works on those messages in collaboration with the teachers, because they have to develop a resource that fits the teachers' needs, so they cannot ignore